Welcome to Leaving Academia, Becoming a Freelance Editor. I'm your host, Paulina Cossette. My guest on the podcast today is Daniel DeRock. Daniel is a former political science professor who lives in the Netherlands and is now an academic copy editor and coach. In this conversation, he shares how and why he left academia despite being successful and doing everything right on paper, and how he's navigating the process of niching down in his business, including balancing academic copy editing work with an emerging interest in fiction editing and book coaching. Most illuminating, though, is what Daniel shares about how his life has changed since he left higher ed and started his business. Rather than being driven by the expectations of other people and doing work because it's what he, quote unquote, should do, Daniel now has the time, energy, and space to run a business guided by what he actually wants to do, while also having a life, hobbies, and creative pursuits outside of work. If you're struggling to figure out your next steps, listen to Daniel's story and imagine what life can be like for you when you decide to follow your passions. Let's dive in. Welcome to Leaving Academia, Becoming a Freelance Editor, the podcast. I'm your host, Paulina Cossette. In 2019, I was a political science professor who was fed up with the stress and hostility of academia, not to mention the low pay. I left my tenure-track job and went from barely surviving to thriving as a freelance academic editor. Today, I own Acadia Editing Services, an editing and coaching business that brings in 6 figures a year. In this podcast, I'll discuss the challenges of academia, what academic editing involves, and what life as a freelancer looks like. If you're willing to jump outside your comfort zone, it is possible to find joy, true flexibility, and a profitable and rewarding career as an academic editor. Thanks for listening. Well, hi, Daniel. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Paulina. Thanks. Happy to be here.
So you were a professor and recently left academia. So tell us your story about what you did as an academic and why you decided to leave.
Yeah, so I guess starting most recently, I was up until the summer, until I quit. We'll get into the why of that, I'm sure. I was an assistant professor of international political economy. For those outside of the field, that's sort of a subfield of international relations, which is a subfield of political science. So my background's in political science. I'm originally from the US, but I've been living and working in the Netherlands for a while. I'm in Nijmegen, the Netherlands, the east of the country. So going back then, I did my bachelor's in the US, and that's already where this kind of, I guess, dual interest in political science and writing and editing started because I double majored in political science and English. So I already had that kind of tension sort of from the beginning. I couldn't decide between creative writing and political science. I loved both. So I did English with a specialization in creative writing. That was at the University of Iowa, where, there's a big writing program. And I did political science. I've been involved in politics and activism and everything for a long time. And well, there aren't that many jobs in literature. So I guess it sort of worked out that I ended up I took some time off, worked in, I guess, the nonprofit sector and some sort of odd jobs for a while. This was around the financial crisis. But I had also studied abroad during my bachelor's degree here in the Netherlands and met my now wife. So I had a kind of base here too. My wife and I after we had met, we lived in the US for a few years and then both decided to come back to this university town to do our master's degrees where it was a lot more affordable. So I ended up I hadn't necessarily expected to do grad school just because of the cost a bit for the most part, and it just didn't really, see that as a feasible path. But I loved it. I did my master's here in international relations. I did really well. I wasn't always the most, I guess, motivated student as an undergrad, but as a slightly older master's student, I was really motivated. Graduated cum laude and got a PhD position in Amsterdam. So it just sort of kept working out. I was getting more and more interested in kind of niching down into my research. So I really enjoyed my PhD in Amsterdam. That was like 100% research. I really loved it. Got to do a lot of field work, a bit of teaching experience. Then I did, well, I guess where it started already, I guess I started running into some problems was personal problems was I in my last year of my PhD, after my funding had already run out, I was teaching full time online. This was during COVID. And so I was trying to finish my dissertation, teaching full time, and also applying for faculty positions and postdocs. So like already setting myself up for a burnout, which did happen. And I think that so like on the surface, everything was going really well. This was around 2021, something like that. So I was doing this full-time teaching. I got a postdoc position actually at a law school, which was a bit strange, culturally speaking. Like the academic culture was totally different. I did that for a few months, and then I got this faculty position, this assistant professor position, at the same place where I had studied abroad. So it felt like total dream job. It was exactly what I had hoped for, but I still had to defend my dissertation even before the job started. So I had to wrap up this postdoc, finish my dissertation or prepare for defending my dissertation and start this new job. So I think I was already in burnout looking back when I started the job and just kept pushing through it because you're a new faculty member, you have to perform, you have to kind of prove yourself. That's how I felt. I even didn't have a permanent contract until the first year. I sort of did have to kind of prove myself that first year. So that added extra pressure to kind of push through health problems that were already coming up, stress related things. But still, it was kind of in the back of my mind, okay, this is my dream job, deal with it, you know. And in some ways, it got better. There's a learning curve from PhD or postdoc to assistant professor, all these new tasks, so much task switching. So I started, it was satisfying to learn these things, but my health just kept deteriorating. My happiness, my work-life balance just kept getting worse and worse until it became really unbearable. That was combined with a lot of budget cuts at my university and nationwide. So where I used to have like a TA, I didn't have one. I was doing the work of two or three people, it felt like. And so I just really reached my limit. I had kind of, since I had other interests like writing, literature, I had I could see a life outside of academia before, and I never really saw myself going, if I was really honest with myself, going all the way to full professor, but I didn't really want to admit that to myself, I guess. But I had considered it, but whenever I had considered that, it was a sort of slow exit. And it happened much faster than I had planned. It was just sort of one day to the next. No, I'm done. I'm way over my limits, so I just didn't come back for the fall semester and then took your course. So yeah, that's my long recap.
You hit on a lot of points that I think are common to my story too, but really to a lot of people that I talk with. And probably the biggest one is you said that, as you were finishing the dissertation, you were having to juggle all these different roles from defending the dissertation and like I'm sure there was emotion there about just, the elation and the excitement of graduating and oh, this is finally done. But then you have to just keep pushing, even though you're completely burnt out. And like anyone in any other role would take like a break or a
Yeah,
vacation, but like we don't even have
exactly.
time to do that because you're desperately preparing syllabi and lesson plans and things for the classes that you have to
Yeah.
teach and trying to learn this whole new identity of like, I remember starting my job and they're like, "Oh, you're going to be on this committee." And I'm like, "What's a committee?" Nobody
Yeah,
ever explained this to me.
exactly.
And so I remember that feeling myself, and I know a lot of people experience that. But like you said, it's like you just keep going because this is what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
This is what everybody says we do. This is just the way
Hmm.
it is, and we kind of take that and tell ourselves this story just so we can keep, being successful.
Yeah. And it's fascinating because there are some people I think kind of internalize this earlier on. They kind of know from a young age that this is what they want to do. That wasn't necessarily the case for me, but I had deeply internalized it nonetheless. It was like, that's what you do. You get ingrained in this culture, and this is the one path that you have. And I really, even though as I said, like I still had other interests and could imagine doing other things, I never really took those seriously because once you're in, you don't see a way out. That's how it felt. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we're also told this story that like there is no alternative. You know, you're
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
this is what you're going to do until you die, and that's the way it is. You know, there's like to think
Yeah.
of doing something else as almost like a betrayal of the academy and everything
Exactly.
that it's
Yeah.
supposed to represent. So, you mentioned that you left sort of abruptly, and
Mm.
I did too. Like I was scheduled to teach in the fall of 2019, and over that summer, like the entire summer, I was just like, I can't go back. I can't go back. And I finally got the courage to call my
Yeah.
department chair and quit. So I'm curious what the evolution was like for you. Discover did you know you wanted to go into editing? Did you somehow discover my program and then decide you were going to quit? Or, like what was the decision process? Because I think a lot of people struggle with taking that leap and making that decision, and it helps for them to hear kind of how it plays out for folks.
Yeah. I mean, I think finding your podcast actually did make a big difference. I mean, because it looking back, I've kind of been reflecting on this. It in some ways it feels a bit like a random choice to go into editing, but it's not at all. So first of all, because it's sort of a natural kind of outgrowth of like our skills and everything like that. But also, I'd almost forgotten this, but I mean, I've considered this for a long time. Looking back, I know on the podcast there's a lot of discussion about like editing certifications and things like that. I haven't done a big one, but I did this very short, kind of basic one. It's like the ACES pointer certification. It's relatively cheap. It's kind of surface level, but you get a certificate. And I logged into that and realized that I already had an account from like 5 years ago and I hadn't remembered that. So I guess I kind of repressed that, but I had already been trying to become certified as an editor even when I was still doing my PhD because it did feel like sort of as you know I am a writer and it sort of felt like a natural fit, but I hadn't considered it as an actual possibility. But I guess going back even further, since I've spent so much time abroad, all the way since, studying abroad as an undergrad through to doing my master's and PhD, I've always been the lone or one of the few native English speakers where everyone is required to write in English. So I kind of took on the role of proofreading for free, something that I won't do anymore. But I proofread a lot of papers by non-native English speakers, just you know, as a favor. And I guess the word kind of spread. And then even while I was doing my PhD, I got a couple of, I guess, freelance jobs. So working on books, I did, yeah, a manuscript. I worked on a dissertation to book project and an edited volume. I just sort of did some copy edits and some even more substantial developmental edits on those. And anytime I was sort of having doubts, like throughout this whole academic career about, okay, what's next? Editing always popped up as a possibility. So I had looked into like big academic publishers, like Elsevier is one that's based in the Netherlands. They sometimes have jobs, but it always seemed a bit out of reach. There's like managing editor roles or, yeah, none of this seemed feasible. So it either seemed like I was going to be a freelancer, kind of just chasing after low paid jobs, or there was these kind of more glorious editing jobs that I had no idea how to obtain. So I never knew that there was like a feasible path forward until it became really clear that I couldn't go on and had to find something. And this suddenly became not just a backup, but actually like option number one above anything else, like working in NGOs or things like that, which I guess theoretically could have done. like this really suddenly seemed like really what I wanted to do after discovering that it could be an option. Yeah.
So it sounds like you sort of dabbled with editing for a while, which I think a lot of people do, and then realized that, hey, I actually can make a living from this in a way
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
supports the lifestyle that I want and allows me to live where I want to live. So, how did you develop your business? Take us on that journey of how did you decide what you want your business to look like and what does it look like today?
Yeah. So my business is flow state editing. And again, it's one of these things that looks like it emerged spontaneously, but like it was the result of all of this kind of all of these things that were happening in the background that I just talked about. So I guess I was sort of ready to hit the ground running in some ways because I had thought about this before. And the timeline was sort of, I officially put in my resignation in early July, but I already started having the conversation with my supervisors in early June, sort of planting the seed that, okay, I might not be coming back. And it was back in May, I think, that I discovered this course and got like immediately hit the ground running with trying to think about how this could work. So like I only felt comfortable quitting. I would have I was way past my limit. So I guess I would have done it anyway, but I was more confident doing it since I had this 1.5, 2 months behind me of sort of putting together this plan, even if it was a kind of sketchy plan at first. By July, I registered as trying to find, there's some words I can only find the Dutch word because I've been here so long, as a small business, right? As a independent like
Like an
operator.
LLC or
Yeah,
something?
exactly. Yeah. So I registered as a business in July. I was fortunately still getting paid for a few months after that, so I had a bit of a cushion there. But around October is when I had to start making money for myself. So I had a little bit of a runway, a little bit of a cushion to start trying to figure out what this business would look like and learn how to attract clients. I was lucky to have colleagues who were really supportive of what I was doing. So I got a couple papers already from friends, former colleagues at the beginning, which was a huge help. Like paid jobs, of course, because yeah, I need to make money now. I'm not doing that for free. And that really helped to kind of get some experience, relatively low pressure. I still wanted to get a good testimonial and everything, but they were friends. So it was a nice kind of introduction to editing professionally. And then I returned to LinkedIn. I had quit LinkedIn years ago and kind of vowed never to come back, but it has changed a lot, I've realized. Kind of academic Twitter to some extent has migrated there, and I found it to be a huge, I mean, I'm trying to change this, but that's my sole marketing platform basically right now, and it's worked. So it's been word of mouth mainly, occasionally people finding my posts. Yeah, I could talk more about what kind of work I'm doing, I guess, but that's sort of the how I got started. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember you enrolling in the program early in the summer, like in May, and when people enroll, they get immediate access to the course materials, the videos, everything, and our Slack community. And I remember you posting in Slack questions about the website and stuff. And I was so impressed that you really dove into it. You were very excited to get started and you just kind of took the bull by the horns and went after it. And then we started your coaching cohort in September. And I remember it was week 2 that you told us you had your first clients. And I think that's got to be a record. I think that's probably the earliest. So I think that's a great illustration of how, people ask me all the time, how long is it going to take to get clients? And like, I mean, I can't really answer that, but I can say it takes as long as it takes you to get going, like
Yeah.
if people are scared to put themselves out there, I think there's a lot of people who are in the program who just have this fear of failure and fear of, whether it's the imposter syndrome or like, they feel a bit ashamed because they are running a business and not are not a professor anymore. Whatever it is, like all those feelings are normal, but they really do hold you back from making progress. And I think if people are able to do what you did and like set all of that aside and say, yeah, I'm
Hmm.
scared. Yeah, I'm feel weird about this, but I'm going to do it anyway, they
Yeah.
can really be successful.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And yeah, go on.
No, I am curious to why don't you tell us what type of editing you do? Because I know that's been, you started out with copy editing, but you've kind of expanded a bit. So tell us about what that journey's been like.
Yeah, it's like I'm still at in some respects still at the beginning of this, but like I've been doing it long enough, although not that long, only a few months, long enough that I've had been able to kind of experiment and do some fine tuning, I guess. So I've done a bit of everything. I've done probably mostly copy editing for academic articles, mostly in political science or political economy. I've done a bit of what I guess you can call developmental editing, which I've always been interested in doing more of. One example is I was contacted by a research institute doing peace and conflict studies. So they were organizing a writing retreat with about 10 participants, postdocs and PhD candidates, all with a paper in progress or a chapter of their dissertation. And since these were in progress articles, it was by default more developmental editing, which I had wanted to do, but didn't have a ton of experience with. So that was really nice to get that opportunity to kind of write a manuscript assessment or an editorial report. So I've done a bit of that. And I've also done a bit of what I guess you can call coaching, which I also want to do more of. So I've been contacted by some PhD students and postdocs who are working on a piece of writing, but it's clear that there's sort of a deeper challenge that's kind of that, there's a hurdle there that doesn't necessarily have to do with the writing itself, but something with the relationship to the supervisors or something else going on, or just a real urgent need to meet a deadline and just feeling overwhelmed. So I love that. That's something I always enjoyed as a professor, working with, yeah, as a thesis supervisor, for example. Like that's sort of I didn't necessarily call it coaching, but that's what it was. And I really enjoyed that. So I'm sort of doing a mix now. And to totally kind of derail the conversation, I'm also getting now into fiction editing and coaching. So I have a pretty clear idea of where I want to go. And the challenge right now is to sort of how much do I niche down and kind of close this off now? And how much do I kind of leave this open? So right now I see where I want to go, which is both academic editing and creative writing editing, more towards book coaching and developmental editing. But I certainly don't, at this point, I don't want to close off any copy editing jobs and that sort of thing. So that's sort of what I'm struggling with right now is how much do I niche down and how long is this timeline to, how long am I giving myself to get where I want to go, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, we spend a lot of time in the program talking about niching down, and I try to share with everybody the importance of it because I think, when you're starting out, it does feel counterintuitive or even a bit scary to define yourself as I am a copy editor of political science research or something like that.
Yeah.
And you have this fear that, well, if I do that, then nobody else is going to hire me. When
Hmm.
actually the opposite is true. It's, you start to define who you are and speak very specifically to a certain group of people. And that can be by subfield, it can be by type of client. So either grad students or junior faculty or, book authors or whatever. But I think what you're seeing is that even when you do that, there are other types of people and other types of projects that will sort of float your way
Yeah.
and they will connect with you because you when your personality and your values and your style and your essence, for lack of a better word,
Yeah.
comes through in your marketing, that's what I think they connect with. It doesn't matter that you're a political scientist.
Mm.
It's that they gel with you, they like you, and they want to work with you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm also starting to realize or sort of differentiate between like what I'm passionate about and what I'm just good at. And because in some ways, yeah, it feels a bit sad to say, but in some ways my entire academic career was I was good at it. I don't know if I was passionate about it, right? Like, and I think it's easy to confuse that sometimes. I was really good at what I did. There were times I really enjoyed it and was really passionate about it. Definitely. So but I had all these other passions that kept getting swept under the rug. Like all this creative writing stuff, right? So I was a writer before I was a political scientist, and that part of my identity just kind of got like kept getting pushed to the side. And and so I one of the reasons I kept going with my job was that I was still getting good evaluations. I was still on paper doing a good job. And I thought, well, okay, then I should keep going. But just because I'm good at something doesn't mean I necessarily have to devote my life to it. It wasn't making me happy. So I'm sort of trying to apply that to running a business now too. I'm a good copy editor. It's fun. Like there are parts of it that I really like. I understand political science research backwards and forwards. I can really help political scientists get their articles ready for publication. There's still this inner voice, though, that's saying, okay, but there might be more, right? Is this what I really want to do? Just because I'm good at it doesn't mean that I have to make this my entire life or my entire business. So, like, that's what I'm trying to figure out. So, I feel like if I'm really honest with myself, I really want to get more into the creative side of things, whether that's working with fiction writers solely or also in some way academics who are yeah, somehow wanting to tap into their creative side or doing sort of more experimental stuff. So however that looks, I'm trying to follow my gut and kind of, yeah, do what I'm really passionate about. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the beautiful thing about owning your own business is that you are the one who's in the driver's seat, and you get
Yeah.
to decide. And so even though on the one hand I tell you guys to niche down and to be very specific about who you serve and how you help them, it doesn't have to be set in stone. You
Yeah.
can draft your website homepage one way today. And then as you realize over the next several months that you really do want to take on more fiction writing or more coaching or whatever it is, you can change it. You
Yeah.
get to be the boss and you get to say, I'm going to take on fewer of these clients and more of those clients. And you change the niche,
Yeah.
and you start to become known for something different. And it's it's totally, I think it's easier to do that in the beginning because you don't really have your personal brand yet. It's really in
Right.
flux.
Yeah.
And so you can take that time in the beginning to shift things around and really pursue what it is that you love to do.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what, so I sort of, like you said, I really dove into this head first, went really fast. I'm pretty proud of what I accomplished already, but now it felt maybe it's just winter sort of hibernating. I'm pulling back a little bit in sort of, I don't know if it's a pivot, if it's too early to call it a pivot, but I'm kind of taking a step back and taking stock and seeing like, okay, what's next? So I I actually have a very clear vision of what I want it to be. But there's kind of a step of the next step is like allowing myself to do that. I know exactly my website's gonna go undergo like a big makeover. I know that I kind of know what I want the business to look like by, say, the summer. But for some reason, like admitting that, taking that step is a bit scary, maybe just for the simple reason that I'm afraid of losing potential clients. If I start to yeah, niche down like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
or
I think I'm ready. Yeah.
to shift to something else. Well, I think
Exactly.
the approach that you're taking, like on a 6 month kind of window, is really smart because it's as much as I'm a planner and I would love to plan like 3 to 5 years ahead for myself. I think it's hard to do that in business because you just don't know what's going to shift for you personally in your life and your own interests and wanting what you want to pursue, but you also can't really predict what's going to happen in the market and, what people are going to need. And so
Yeah.
to think of it on that kind of 6 month scale, I think is really smart. And so your September cohort wrapped up around the end of November, and you're joining the Academic Entrepreneurs Studio, which our first meeting is tomorrow, I think, right?
Yeah.
And so I think you're in a really great transition spot to shift from I'm a beginner and I'm just figuring out all the basics and learning, how to write copy and how to create a homepage and how to land my first clients and work for them. Like that's what we cover in BAE. And then now you've done that, you've got that under your belt. You're probably more confident than when you first started out. And
Mhm.
so we're shifting into the studio where we start to work on these questions of like, okay, now that I've gotten started, what do I want my dream business to really look like as I move forward, and how do I build that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and as you're saying that, it's sort of amazing how much I have learned in the past, half year or even less. Just these things, like building a website, like that was fun. It was like this stuff was stressful because I felt this pressure to get everything started, but it was really fun learning all of these new skills. Even marketing, like I'm shocked to admit that I found that fun, but it is, it's like it just even if just for the fact that it's new, that it's something I always thought in academia that my discipline was so broad and so interdisciplinary that like it encompassed everything, any of my interests could sort of fit under that umbrella, but there's so much out there, even web design, things that just yeah, it's just kind of really liberating to just try new things like that. So it's kind of amazing how much I've learned in the past few months to half year. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that marketing is probably the biggest fear that people have, or aside from like the fear that they're going to fail or people are going to think they're no good at this, there's the fear of like, oh, I have to put myself out there and like try to sell my services. But then, when you learn how to do it in a way that feels authentic to you and really comes
Yeah.
from your own voice and the ideas that you want to share with the world, it is fun, right? You're no longer held back by your institution or like the place that you're supposed to represent, your department or something. You get to be who you are
Yeah.
and not worry about the rest of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So tell us a bit. I'm curious, we talked about how you had a lot of burnout in academia. How has your life changed since you left teaching and started the business?
I mean, it's incredible. Like I can barely even put into words how much it's changed. It was hard. It was really hard taking this step. I knew I couldn't keep going. Wasn't it wasn't good for my health. It wasn't good for, I wasn't fully myself for the people around me. It just wasn't sustainable. And so it had gotten so bad that it was terrifying, but I knew that there was all of this freedom on the other side. So I just like was able to take that step and just literally every day since then it's just been just better and better. I mean, my health problems have for the most part disappeared. I'm more energized, I'm more creative. Probably the biggest, I mean, this might be a bit abstract. There were a lot of concrete reasons that I was dissatisfied, but probably the biggest personal reason I left was that I had lost touch with my creativity, which was something that I was really starting to grieve, I guess, like this huge part of my identity. It might be a bit of a sidetrack, but I saw a post on LinkedIn recently by a professor, not even in my network, and he was saying that right before the winter holidays, he was completely burned out, couldn't go on, couldn't imagine another day of doing this job, but took 2 weeks of doing absolutely nothing, and now he's ready to go again. And I thought, and everyone was celebrating this. And I thought, that's awful because those are 2 weeks when you're literally doing nothing, when you're just recovering. And like all of my free time was recovery. So that's time that wasn't going into hobbies. It wasn't going into learning new things. It wasn't going into spending time outside or with my family or friends. It was just recovery. And that's not life, you know? It's like the last year of my faculty position on paper was the best year so far because I had learned a lot. I had learned how to kind of manage my energy levels a little bit, but everything was geared towards getting enough sleep, recovering on the weekends, being ready to teach again on Monday morning. And that was it. And that's not life though, for me at least. For some people that might be enough, for me it wasn't. So just like having all of this energy come back, this creative energy, this kind of like spark of life again is just I can't put it into words. I mean, it sounds a bit maybe cheesy, but I mean it's like I mean, I really needed this. And then I have energy for work again. Like, I mean, work is creative. So I'm dedicating time to my own writing, but also the work itself feels creative in a way that it didn't in academia. So I don't know if that answers the question, but it really just changed everything, I guess. Yeah.
I think that's such an important point that you're making because I think it's absolutely true that when we're teaching, it becomes all consuming, you know, when you are in the middle of the semester, even as somebody who had a child, I mean, I left when my son was a year old, so I wasn't a parent in academia for very long, but like the semester becomes all consuming. And like, yes, you sit down and you have dinner with your family or whatever, but constantly in your mind is, I have to do this, or I have to prepare that lecture, or I have to finish that paper, or I have to write that committee report or whatever. Like it just takes over your life. And like you said, there's no space in terms of time or energy for anything else.
Yeah.
And I think you're absolutely right that that is not a way, in my opinion, either to live. Like life should be lived for all kinds of things, for our career, for travel, for our loved ones, for our hobbies, whatever. Like there should be space for that all the time. And then vacation should be spent actually having fun, doing new things and, whatever we
Right.
like. So I love that you have highlighted that you can do work that's very similar to what you used to do. Like you said earlier, coaching is very similar to advising and mentoring, but yet you're doing it in a way that allows you to have space for the other things that you also love to do in life.
Yeah, exactly. And in some ways, I feel like I've been able to take my favorite parts of academic work and just sort of focus only on those. So I mean, aside from research, although I should say that I have that you still have the opportunity to do research once you're outside of academia. And I had planned on doing that. I had a couple articles in the pipeline. I was going to apply for a grant for independent researchers, but I just don't care anymore. If I'm being totally like, once I realize that I don't need to do this, I realize I can do anything I want. Why am I trying to publish in articles that won't pay me anything? Like, so I guess aside from research, which I've sort of yeah, if I'm fully honest, sort of lost interest in. My favorite parts of academic work were like mentoring, I guess. I did a lot of supervising bachelor and master's theses, and I really enjoyed that. Working one-on-one with students, especially students who were struggling in some way. I really liked seeing seeing students make progress with their writing, especially when there was some other barrier. Like they were smart, they knew how to write. And I loved being able to help them to learn how to structure an article, learn how to carve out time for writing, things like that, which went beyond the job description, but sometimes it was necessary. And those that kind of opportunity gave me energy when I was otherwise really burned out. And now I get to do that as a big part of my job. And I loved anything related to writing. So I I loved self-editing my own articles. I loved, when I had time to write, to revise my own writing, to yeah, do any kind of, peer review, things like that. anything related to the writing process. And so those kind of two things are kind of the core of my work now. Without the faculty meetings, without, you know, teaching I did enjoy to some extent, but it was too much work for one person, especially since I was usually building courses from scratch. Like most of the courses I taught, I designed and was constantly fine-tuning them, updating the syllabus. So the things that really burned me out, I got to kind of leave behind and focus on what I liked. So that's really nice.
Yeah, I think that's addresses something a lot of people are scared of, that like if they leave academia, who are they? What is my identity if I'm not a professor anymore? And the reality is you're still the same person you've always been. You can still do the work you've always loved, but you don't have to deal with the BS anymore or
Yeah.
the mistreatment or anything you don't want, because you get to be in charge. So you mentioned earlier that you're also branching out into fiction. So tell us about the book coaching certificate that you're doing and how all of that is playing out for your business.
Yeah, so I guess the background to this is, so as I said, I am a fiction writer and I've always done that kind of on the side. I've written my own novel. I mean, I'm finishing the kind of, I'm getting ready to send that off to agents and publishers. I have a lot of experience in the literary world. I've been a literary magazine editor. I'm a co-founder and co-editor in chief of a literary magazine. So this has always been a huge part of my identity, but always it's as an academic, it was something that I had to think of as a hobby. And now that I'm out, I'm able to kind of shape my own identity in a way that I couldn't before. So I'm sort of asking myself, like, why not? Why not make this a core part of my work? And another thing that I experienced in the first few months of running my business is that there are clients, also academic clients, who are interested in more creative projects, and I was losing those because I wasn't showing off this literary background that I had. I had I sort of competed with a couple other editors for a really interesting project that was sort of at the intersections of the social sciences, art, and creative writing. Super interesting, kind of more experimental book, blending this, I guess, social science, ecological research with, yeah, more forms of experimental writing. And I lost that job because this potential client didn't know I had a background in creative writing. So they said, okay, you look, you seem great, but I went with someone who has a background in the arts. And I wanted to say, I do too. But that wasn't on my website. So how could they know? So I had to kind of take a step back and see, okay, how can this is something pretty unique actually, to have this academic background and this creative writing background. And I really need to put this front and center. And that's something I still haven't done. That's something I'm doing kind of in the background. So my website will kind of be overhauled soon to kind of put this more front and center. So what I kind of envision, I'm doing this program as a training. It's self-paced, but roughly 6 months to become a fiction book coach. It's with a program called Author Accelerator, and the reason they offer certifications in either fiction, memoir, or nonfiction. And so, as an academic editor, nonfiction would have been the natural fit. But what I realized though is that I've written a novel. I have not written an academic book, right? So in some ways, that's the more natural fit. So I can coach someone on writing a novel because I've done it, whereas I haven't written an academic book. So I went for fiction, and that I just kind of did that intuitively. When I take a, I'm kind of, sometimes it feels like I'm making these decisions so fast and so intuitively that I kind of look back over my shoulder and think like, whoa, why did I do that? Like, how did that happen? So now I'm suddenly getting certified as a fiction book coach just because it felt like a natural fit. And I'm really happy with that choice. But now the question is, how do I incorporate that into my current business? So what I kind of see is a kind of two-prong business model where I'm going to have services for fiction writers. And even within that, I can kind of niche down. I mainly do speculative fiction, so like science fiction and fantasy adjacent kind of stuff, which often has political themes. So I could even market myself and niche down as, a former political scientist and a science fiction author. So, if you're writing books with political or ecological themes, environmental themes, like I've done research on this, I can help you with this. So that's one way to blend it. And then on the other side, there are academics who might be interested in doing more creative writing, right? Writing more experimental books or kind of tapping into their creative side, maybe trying to experiment with fiction, whatever it is. So I don't see myself moving away from an academic client base completely. If that happens, it happens. If a year from now I see that 80% of my clients are fiction writers, I might decide to completely go that direction. But right now, I don't think I need to close that off. I think there's a really interesting kind of Venn diagram here where between academics who are seeking to tap into their creativity and fiction writers or creative writers who are doing more like research intensive writing. So I'm really kind of curious about where this will go. But yeah, right now I think it's kind of where I want to be. So I'm excited.
Yeah, I love that you are pursuing that professional development or continuing education, these certificate programs based on what you enjoy rather than what, like we said earlier, what you're just good at or what you should be doing because somebody else says you should be doing it.
Yeah.
And it's when it's all said and done, like even if you decided at the end that you didn't want to be a fiction book coach, you're probably going to have knowledge and skills that you've gained from that course that can still be applied elsewhere, or you have the enjoyment of the experience of taking that course and that program. And it's wonderful to see people who have been forced into a box for so long to start to, spread your wings and go after what makes you happy instead of, what you quote unquote should be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, it's a good feeling.
Well, I so appreciate you joining me on the podcast and sharing your story. I know it's going to help a lot of people to hear what you've gone through and how you overcame it and what life can look like on the other side. If you can find the courage to take the leap, things really can be so different and so much better. How can people get in touch with you if they would like to find out more or work with you?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so you can find me there, but also through my website. That's flowstateediting.com. I have a contact form there, or you can also schedule a free call. Yeah, that's the best way.
Great. Thanks so much, Daniel.
Thank you very much.
If you're unhappy in academia and you think you might be a good editor or writing coach, check out my course, Becoming an Academic Editor. This digital course is paired with a 12-week group coaching program to support you through your decision to leave academia or not, and to start building a profitable and rewarding academic editing business. Learn more by going to acadiaediting.com/become an editor. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time.